Hey guys, it's Raul again, and today I'll be talking to you guys about the Cuba Saga by Chanel Clayton. So if you guys have been watching my channel for a while now, you guys know that I absolutely adore the Cuba Saga by Chanel Clayton. I've talked about the first 3 books in this series a couple of times on my channel. They've popped up in wrap-ups and reviews and things like that. But I wanted today to talk about the series as a whole, as the 4th book in the series is coming out on May 4th, and I wanted to talk about that kind of all together. I was lucky enough to receive an ARC from the publisher on the 4th book, The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba. I'm definitely going to be talking about that book at the end of this kind of full review of the series so far, but I wanted to briefly kind of touch on the first 3 novels and then talk about book 4. Again, I know that I've talked about this before, but if you guys have not heard me talk about the series before, you guys will get a little kind of glimpse into what this series is all about. So the Cuba Saga is a historical fiction series that takes place mainly in Cuba, or has some connection to Cuba in some way. We have, like I said, 3 books that are out so far. Book 4 comes out on May 4th. The first book is one that has been mentioned before, and it's The Next Year in Havana. I think this is the most famous one because it was the first one and everything. This one follows 2 different perspectives. It follows Elisa in 1958 and then Marisol in 2017. Marisol is the granddaughter of Elisa, and when Elisa passes away, kind of one of her final wishes is to have her ashes scattered in Cuba. So Marisol takes her ashes and flies out to Cuba to kind of fulfill her grandmother's last wishes now that she, lives in the United States and everything. So she goes and does that. She ends up finding out a lot about Elisa's family and her past and everything, her kind of lost loves that she left behind in Cuba, and Marisol kind of begins to fall in love with her grandmother's birthplace. I feel like I've talked enough on other videos about how much I love this book and the series as a whole. So again, I'm not going to gush about it too much here, but if that synopsis sounds very interesting to you guys, I highly recommend you guys checking at least this first book out to kind of see if you guys really enjoy the writing style. If you guys enjoy the first book in it, you guys are going to love the rest of the books in this series, because every book is connected by this Perez family. So every book contains a member of this family in some way, and that's kind of what keeps this series connected throughout these companion novels. Now, you can read them somewhat in whatever order you'd like to, because they're all, like I said, companion novels, so you don't necessarily need to read the first book to have read the next one, and so on and so forth, but it is nice to kind of get the perspectives from the very beginning, especially with book 1 and immediately following book 2. Because then in book 2, we have When We Left Cuba, which follows Beatriz, which is the sister to Elisa. So this takes place right after the events that are going on in 1958 in the first book, and I believe this one starts in early 1960s, as the Perez family is now leaving Cuba and moving to the United States. This now follows a different perspective of a different sister that you get to meet in the first book. So you kind of really get to know this character in the first book and really get in depth to this new character in book 2 as this kind of storyline continues on. The sister, again, they're in the United States. She kind of gets involved with the government, becomes somewhat of a spy. So it's very interesting, very intriguing, this new perspective that you get in the second book. Another romance that kind of follows throughout this book as well. All of these books contain some kind of a romance, but they're not very romance heavy. It is really focusing more on the political aspects and the historical things that were going on in Cuba and the United States at this time. And then we have The Last Train to Key West, which is the 3rd book in the series. This is the first time that the author kind of did multiple perspectives within this series, or at least as many perspectives as she did. The first one does have 2 perspectives, but they're kind of really connected and intertwined. They kind of go hand in hand. But this one, she has 3 different perspectives, 3 different women that you're not really sure how or what type of connection they share. You have these 3 different storylines in Key West, and this one actually goes further back into the past. This one takes place in 1935, again in Key West, as there is a large hurricane that is approaching Key West, and people are kind of, skeptical about this hurricane, about how devastating it's supposed to be. People are kind of downplaying the gravity of this hurricane, and people are kind of, preparing for it, not sure really what to expect. So you have these 3 different perspective of these three different women that are revolving around these events of this hurricane that is approaching. The member of the Perez family that you're following in this book is Milta Perez, as she recently gets married, is a new bride, is trying to kind of get to know her husband in a new way, and moves to the United States. So on top of her being in a new marriage and getting used to this kind of new lifestyle, she's also, moved to a new place, and now she has to get used to this new culture as well. And then the other two perspectives that you follow in this book is one of a woman who's kind of escaping a bad marriage or a bad relationship, and she's kind of running away from kind of this unhealthy situation that she's in. And then you have another woman who is kind of searching for her brother who's in the military, and then you have these three different perspectives, how these women, eventually they end up meeting, how their stories end up affecting one another, and then this whole kind of background of this hurricane that's happening, the dangers that are approaching and everything. So it's definitely a very interesting take on this. I don't know if I was thrown off a little bit when I first started reading it, just because I was expecting something more like in book 1 and 2 where you're following the Perez family directly, and this was, again, follows it very indirectly. So this is the first time you kind of see in this series where you can kind of read these out of order, just because I don't feel like, at least starting here with book 3, you would really miss anything out from books 1 and 2, because again, it has a member of the Perez family, but it's not directly connected to the events of book 1 and 2. So this is another one that you can kind of pick up at random and still really enjoy. It's a fairly short one, so fitting in all of these kind of storylines, I was wondering how it was going to really kind of play out, since it was a shorter story and you had 3 different storylines going on, but in the end it was absolutely amazing. I loved how the author was able to kind of intertwine these 3 stories and give us such a great refreshing, kind of really in-depth story of this historical event as well. And then we have book 4, The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba, which is probably my favorite book of the series so far. It's definitely, I enjoyed it a lot more than The Last Train to Key West. I mean, this is definitely a very, very strong contender for my favorite one of the series so far. This one, again, follows 3 different perspectives, but it's following, again, we're going further back in time with this one at the end of the 19th century, and we're following the Spanish Revolution in Cuba. So this one takes place more within Cuba, whereas The Last Train to Key West took place outside of Cuba. This one's following, again, 3 different perspectives. There's one perspective of a reporter back in New York City who's reporting on all of these events that are happening in Cuba, and then the other 2 perspectives are from 2 women that are still within Cuba. Now, it's really interesting, this one, because one of the main characters, Evangelina Cisneros, is actually based from a real-life person who was actually within, existed in this time, and it's really interesting to kind of see her story as well kind of play out. She's imprisoned at one point and then escapes and is able to make it to the United States, where she becomes very famous, and she becomes kind of the face of this revolution, the face of Cuba, the face that kind of represents the Cuban people at this time, at least in the United States. So she's thrown on to all of this responsibility of having to kind of speak for her people. And then again, you have the reporter that's kind of reporting on all of this that's going on. And then back in Cuba, you have another woman who's kind of going back and forth, kind of taking messages from the military to the Cuban people, and she's, in a very dangerous position. That one character is the one character from the Perez family that we follow in this book itself, and, she has a lot of other things going on with her marriage, her relationship, her daughter, kind of trying to keep her safe and wanting to find a better future for her and her family, and then, also being shunned by the Perez family because she decided to marry a man who was not of her class, so the family kind of, shunned her at that point. So you see kind of this broken relationship within the Perez family from far back, and it's really interesting to kind of see this new perspective and this new take on this family who, in book 1, is very wealthy, very rich, and then seeing one of their family members kind of get shunned and pushed away from all of that kind of lifestyle. So it goes without saying that this is, again, one of my favorite historical fiction series ever. It's probably my favorite. I mean, I haven't read tons of historical fiction, but the historical fiction that I have read, this is top tier. I mean, it's so important, at least to me, coming from Hispanic descent. My wife is Cuban as well, and just seeing all of these things play out, these historical events play out, and how historically accurate they are. I mean, from these stories that my wife has told me, that come from her grandparents and her parents and everything, so many of these things just happened, and it's crazy to me to kind of see it all play out so accurately on the page. I mean, she's read the books as well, and she says that this is this is by far one of the most accurate representations of Cuban history and Cuban culture, and I absolutely love seeing these kinds of things in books. These are such important stories to tell. This is such an important so many great important historical events that just need to be shared with the world that a lot of people just don't know about. I mean, I highly recommend you guys checking this series out. Even if you guys are not fans of historical fiction, I would still give this one a try because, again, these are some of my absolute favorite books ever. So yeah, guys, like I mentioned, The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba comes out on May 4th. I highly recommend you guys checking out this book and checking out the rest of the series. I know that you guys will absolutely enjoy it. Comment down below. Let me know if you guys have read any of the books in the Cuba Saga. If you guys are planning on picking up The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba, I would absolutely love to know and kind of share our thoughts on this series because it is absolutely one of my favorite series ever. Now, before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys all again for watching, and I will see you all next time.